He was a millionaire driving home on a rainy night when he spotted 3 starving kids huddled behind a dumpster. What started as an act of compassion turned into a life-altering discovery that would break his heart and change all their lives forever. Please don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel as a sign of support. It was a cold, drizzly Tuesday afternoon in rural Pennsylvania when Grant Whitaker, a self-made millionaire and CEO of a sustainable agriculture tech company, decided to take the scenic route back to his estate. He often said these long drives helped him clear his mind and stay grounded. What he didn't expect that day was how a simple detour down a winding country road would change his life forever. The rain hit the windshield like a metronome, steady and rhythmic. Grant was half listening to a podcast on soil regeneration when he noticed a flicker of movement near a rusted bus stop shelter. Slowing down out of instinct, he peered through the gray haze and saw 3 small children huddled together under a soaked blanket. They couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years old. Their clothes were thin, their shoes barely held together, and their eyes, those wide, hollow eyes, pierced his heart. Without a second thought, Grant pulled over, turned off the engine, and grabbed the umbrella from the back seat. As he approached, one of the children flinched while the smallest clutched a ragged teddy bear tightly to her chest. "Hey there," Grant said softly, kneeling to their level. "Are you all right? Where are your parents?" The boy, who seemed to be the oldest, hesitated. We don't got parents," he muttered. Grant's heart dropped. "No parents? Are you all alone out here?" The boy nodded solemnly. "I'm Caleb. This is Maddie, and that's Lily. We're triplets. Mom passed away last winter. We've been on our own." Grant didn't know what to say. His voice caught in his throat, but he managed to whisper, "Come on, let's get you warm." He helped them into his SUV and turned the heat up high. He handed them bottles of water and granola bars from the console, leftovers from a hiking trip weeks ago. The kids devoured them as if they hadn't eaten in days. Grant called his assistant, asked her to cancel the rest of his day, and headed toward town. "I'm taking them somewhere safe," he said. "They need help now." He drove them to a nearby pediatric clinic and stayed with them through every exam, paperwork, and welfare check. The doctors confirmed what Grant feared. They were malnourished and dehydrated, but otherwise in surprisingly good shape. As night fell, the kids curled up together on the clinic's waiting room couch, asleep at last. Grant stood nearby, watching them breathe in unison. He couldn't shake the image of them huddled alone in the rain. It stirred something deep within him, an ache he hadn't felt since he lost his younger brother years ago. "This isn't over," he muttered. "I'm not walking away." The next morning, Grant Whitaker arrived at the clinic before sunrise, carrying a paper bag filled with fresh pastries and juice boxes. He wasn't sure what triplets usually ate, but anything had to be better than what they'd been surviving on. The receptionist gave him a warm smile as he walked in. "They're still asleep," she whispered, nodding toward the small waiting room couch where the kids were curled up under donated blankets. "Social services said they'd be sending someone today." Grant's jaw tightened at that. He'd had enough dealings with bureaucracy to know how slow the system moved and how many kids slipped through the cracks. When the kids woke, their eyes lit up at the sight of breakfast. Maddie, the shyest of the 3, gave him a small smile that melted his heart. "Is this all for us?" she asked. "Every bit," Grant replied, ruffling her hair. "You deserve way more than this." They ate quietly, savoring every bite. As the clinic buzzed around them, Grant sat cross-legged on the floor and listened as Caleb told him how they had been staying in an abandoned camper since their mother's death. She'd worked cleaning motels until she got sick. No family had come forward after the funeral. They'd been alone ever since. Grant felt sick just imagining it. "No one helped you?" he asked gently. Caleb looked down. "We tried, but people didn't believe us, or they didn't care." Before Grant could respond, a woman in a navy pantsuit walked in. "I'm Ellen Marks, Child Protective Services," she said, flashing a badge. Her tone was efficient, but not unkind. "I understand you found these children?" Grant stood. "Yes, I'd like to help them, permanently if needed." Ellen blinked, caught off guard. Mr. Whitaker, I appreciate your concern, but there's a process to follow. These children will be placed in temporary care while we locate any relatives. Grant's voice was steady. And if you don't, then we'll assess long-term placement, possibly foster care. No, Grant said firmly. They've been through enough. I can give them stability, a home, education, everything they need. Ellen sighed. We'll take your offer into account, but until we complete our investigation, the children must come with us. Maddie grabbed his arm as the reality hit. Do we have to go? Grant crouched beside her. Just for a little while, sweetheart. I promise I'm not going anywhere. They left in a white government SUV, 3 small faces pressed against the window, eyes wide with fear and uncertainty. Grant stood in the parking lot, fists clenched. He'd rescued them from the rain, but now he felt utterly powerless. Back in his car, he called his lawyer. Find out everything. Who their mother was, what happened, where the gaps are in their case. I need leverage. I'm not letting them disappear into the system. As the phone call ended, Grant stared at the road ahead. He didn't know what he'd uncover, but he was prepared to fight for those kids with everything he had. The day after the triplets were taken into protective custody, Grant couldn't focus on anything. His company board meeting ran without him. Emails piled up, but none of it mattered, not when 3 kids who had just begun to trust him were now in the hands of a system known more for red tape than compassion. By noon, his lawyer, Vanessa Tran, called with an update. Grant, I pulled the birth certificates and social records. Their mother's name was Dana Riley. She passed away from pneumonia 6 months ago. There's no record of the father, no relatives have come forward, but she hesitated. What is it? Grant asked. There's something strange. Dana listed you as an emergency contact on her housing application a few years ago. When she lived in Philly, Grant froze. What? That's not possible. I never met her. I thought so too, but the paperwork is legit. Your old office address was listed, and your name was spelled correctly. You sure you don't know her? Grant leaned back in his chair, racking his brain. Dana Riley, he murmured. Then a foggy memory surfaced, one from almost a decade ago. Back when Grant first started his company, he used to host free workshops on urban farming and job skills for low-income communities. He remembered a soft-spoken woman with curly auburn hair who always sat in the back row. She asked lots of questions and once stayed behind to thank him for helping her plant a backyard garden. Could that have been Dana? It's possible, he said slowly. She might have remembered me. Maybe she thought I could help. Vanessa was quiet for a beat. If she saw you as someone trustworthy, that could work in our favor. I'm already drawing up a petition for emergency guardianship. Grant hung up and stared out the window at the long driveway leading to his property. It was a world away from where those kids had been living. And maybe that was the problem. He'd gotten too comfortable, too distant from the people he'd once promised to serve. Later that afternoon, Grant drove into the city and parked outside the group foster home where the triplets were placed. He wasn't allowed inside without clearance, but he brought a few things: a set of sketchbooks, some warm jackets, and 3 stuffed animals. A staff member came out to accept the items, recognizing him from the local news. They've been asking about you, she said with a kind smile, especially the little one, Lily. That night, Grant sat in his study, surrounded by legal documents, social worker reports, and photos of the kids. He had the resources, the motivation, and now a possible personal link to their late mother. But something still nagged at him. Why hadn't anyone come for them before? As he skimmed through a scanned copy of Dana's old tenant records, one line jumped out. Emergency contact, Grant Whitaker. And just beneath that, scribbled in shaky handwriting, if anything happens to me, he'll know what to do. Grant felt a lump rise in his throat. Dana had trusted him, blindly, maybe even desperately, but now it was his responsibility to make good on that promise. And something told him the real story was only just beginning. Grant didn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Lily clinging to her teddy bear, Caleb pretending to be brave, and Maddie whispering, "Do we have to go?" By sunrise, he was on the phone with Vanessa again. "I want everything you can find about Dana Riley's final months, where she lived, where she worked, who she talked to, and check into the foster home. I want to know how they treat those kids. Vanessa, as usual, didn't ask questions. I'm on it. By noon, the first reports came in. Dana had been living in a rundown part of Harrisburg in an old camper behind a gas station. She had applied for assistance, but had been denied repeatedly. Her employer had let her go when her illness made her unreliable. She died alone in a clinic that never reported the kid's situation to Child Protective Services. How does that even happen? Grant muttered, reading the files in disbelief. How does a mother die and nobody checks on her kids? The answer was what he feared: oversight, bureaucracy, neglect. But the worst news came that afternoon. Vanessa called, her voice tense. Grant, you're not going to like this. I had someone look into the foster home. Talk to me, Grant said, already bracing himself. The home is overcrowded, understaffed. Some complaints have been filed, nothing confirmed. But reports say kids have gone missing for hours at a time. One social worker claimed the director was using intimidation tactics to keep children quiet. Grant stood up so fast he knocked his chair over. Get them out of there, now. It's not that easy, Vanessa said. You're not a legal guardian yet. If you try to intervene without court approval, you could be charged with interference. Grant clenched his jaw. Then we moved the court date up. That takes time. I'm not waiting. Hours later, Grant was parked outside the foster home again. He didn't care if he couldn't go in. He needed to see the kids, know they were okay. As he waited, he saw Caleb through a second-story window, staring out blankly. No smile, no wave. Just a kid who looked like the weight of the world was pressing down on his shoulders. Suddenly, the door burst open. A boy, maybe 10 or 11, ran down the steps crying. One of the adults chased after him, grabbing him by the arm and yanking him back inside. Grant's fists curled into balls. That night, he wrote a letter to the judge assigned to the Triplets case. He poured every ounce of his influence, emotion, and clarity into it. He attached reports, photos, the note Donna had written, and his official request for emergency custody. He didn't just want to help anymore. He needed to. The next morning, as he prepared for his hearing, his assistant burst into his office with a pale face. You need to see this, she said, handing him a grainy phone video that had just gone viral. It showed Maddie in tears, whispering to another child in the foster home. I wish the man with the warm car would come back and take us home. Grant's heart shattered. This was no longer a rescue. This was a mission. Grant stood outside the county courthouse in downtown Harrisburg, clutching a manila folder thick with evidence. He hadn't stepped into a courtroom in years, not since a merger lawsuit nearly cost him his company. But this wasn't about business. This was about 3 kids whose futures were being gambled away by the very system meant to protect them. Inside, the courtroom was modest, its wood-paneled walls lined with faded flags and metal folding chairs. At the center sat Judge Naomi Ellison, a stern woman in her 60s known for her no-nonsense attitude. Across the aisle, a CPS representative named Paul Harmon flipped through his notes. Grant caught the slight eye roll Paul gave when his name was mentioned. Clearly, not everyone appreciated a rich man wading into state affairs. When the hearing began, Vanessa presented their case with calm precision. She outlined Dana Riley's tragic death, the children's abandonment, the dangerous conditions at the foster home, and most importantly, Dana's handwritten note naming Grant. She had no one else, Vanessa said, but she remembered Mr. Whitaker from years ago, from one of his community outreach programs. She trusted him, and now he's willing to honor that trust. Paul stood next, his voice level but dismissive. Your Honor, while we appreciate Mr. Whitaker's sentiment, he has no legal relationship to these children. What's more, we're already in the process of placing them with a licensed foster family. Interfering now would disrupt a state-approved system designed to protect vulnerable minors. Grant stood. With respect, Your Honor, that system failed them for 6 months. They were living in a broken-down camper, starving, alone, and now they're in a home that's under investigation for abuse. Judge Ellison peered over her glasses. Mr. Whitaker, I don't doubt your sincerity, but temporary guardianship is a serious legal step. Are you prepared for what that entails? Education, housing, healthcare, emotional trauma? I am, Grant said without hesitation. I've already enrolled them in private school, arranged for therapy, and child-proofed my home. I've also set up a trust in their names. This isn't temporary for me. I'm all in. There was a long pause, then Judge Ellison said, "We'll take a short recess." As the courtroom emptied, Grant stepped into the hallway, hands trembling. For all his confidence, the stakes here were real. If he failed, those kids might be lost in the system for years. Vanessa joined him. "You did everything right. I still feel like I'm one wrong word away from losing them." 20 minutes later, the court reconvened. Judge Ellison looked over her bench with tired but kind eyes. "Mr. Whitaker, in light of the circumstances, I am granting you temporary guardianship for 90 days while a full investigation is conducted. If your claims are substantiated and the children continue to thrive, we'll revisit permanent custody." Grant exhaled deeply, the weight of it all hitting him at once. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds. A sign, maybe. The triplets were coming home. The CPS van pulled up to Grant Whitaker's estate just after 5 p.m. He stood at the edge of his long driveway, dressed in jeans and a hoodie, trying to look as unintimidating as possible. The property behind him, a sprawling two-story farmhouse surrounded by hills and woods, was a far cry from the foster home they were leaving. As the doors opened, Caleb stepped out first, eyes scanning the grounds with caution. Maddie followed, holding tightly to Lily's hand. The youngest clutched the same ragged teddy bear Grant had seen when they first met. "Hey," Grant said gently, kneeling to their level. "Welcome home." Maddie was the first to run to him. She threw her arms around his neck, tears streaming down her face. "You came back." "I told you I would," Grant whispered, hugging her tight. Caleb stayed back for a moment, his gaze unreadable. "Is this for real?" Grant stood and looked him square in the eye. "As real as it gets, buddy. This is your home now, if you want it." Slowly, Caleb nodded. "Yeah, we want it." Inside the house, the kids were met with warm lighting, the smell of baked mac and cheese, and the sound of soft music playing from the living room. Grant had turned the guest wing into their space. 3 bedrooms, one for each of them, decorated with input from a child psychologist who specialized in trauma recovery. Lily gasped when she saw her room. Stuffed animals lined the shelves, a tiny canopy hung above her bed, and a glittery nameplate with her name sparkled on the door. "You remembered my favorite color," she whispered. "I remembered everything," Grant said with a smile. Dinner was quiet at first. Caleb kept checking over his shoulder, as if expecting someone to scold him for taking seconds. Maddie helped set the table, automatically cutting Lily's food into small bites. It broke Grant's heart. They'd spent so long fending for themselves that they didn't know how to just be kids anymore. That night, as he tucked them in, Lily asked, "Can you leave the light on?" "All night if you want," Grant replied. She yawned and cuddled into her new blanket. "Are you going to be here in the morning?" "I'm not going anywhere," he said. But as he walked back down the hallway, his mind churned with new worries. 90 days. That was all the time he had to prove to the court and the system that this was where the triplets belonged. He knew the investigation would dig into every corner of his life, his finances, his schedule, his background. One misstep, one missed appointment, and the state could take them away again. Vanessa had warned him, "You've won the battle, Grant, but not the war." So he made a vow that night as he stood looking out the window, the moonlight reflecting off the dewy lawn. He would protect them, not just from the cold or the hunger, but from every system, every person, every mistake that had failed them before. Because now, they were his family. 67 days. That's how long Grant had spent learning to be a parent. Learning how to braid Maddie's hair, how to decode Caleb's silences, and how to get Lily to sleep without her clinging to his arm in fear. Each day was equal parts exhausting and healing. Slowly, the triplets began to smile more, laugh louder, and trust deeper. They started school at the local private academy, where their teachers emailed daily updates. Lily was excelling in art. Maddie had joined the reading club, and Caleb, after some coaxing, had tried out for the soccer team. Grant's house, once quiet and sterile, now buzzed with life. There were Nerf gun ambushes in the hallway, pancake mornings that left the kitchen a war zone, and evenings where the living room echoed with movie quotes and giggles. But beneath the joy, the countdown loomed. On day 90, they would return to court to determine if Grant could officially adopt the kids. He had done everything right, passed every background check, submitted every document, completed every home inspection. Yet Grant hadn't slept the night before the hearing. He wasn't afraid of losing money or reputation. He was afraid of losing them. In the courtroom, the triplets sat beside him, dressed in their Sunday best. Caleb gripped his hand under the table. Maddie leaned on his shoulder. Lily sat on his lap, her head tucked under his chin. Judge Ellison entered and the room fell silent. "Mr. Whitaker," she began, "this court has reviewed your guardianship over the past 3 months. Social workers have submitted glowing reports. The children's teachers speak highly of their progress, and the emotional stability they've gained under your care is undeniable." Grant held his breath. "The court has also verified the note left by their mother, Dana Riley. It's clear she had faith in you, and it's clear her instincts were right." Judge Ellison paused, then looked directly at the children. "Caleb, Maddie, Lily, do you feel safe with Mr. Whitaker?" All three nodded. Caleb spoke for them all. "He's our home now." The judge smiled gently. "Then I see no reason to delay. Effective immediately, Grant Whitaker is granted full legal custody of the children, with the option to adopt if he so chooses." Lily beamed. Maddie burst into tears. Caleb, the toughest of the three, let out a deep breath and buried his face in Grant's coat. Grant swallowed hard, emotion catching in his throat. "Thank you, Your Honor." Later back at home, the kids presented Grant with a homemade card. It read, "To Dad, thank you for finding us. We love you." He read it a dozen times, unable to stop smiling. That night, as they curled up together on the big couch watching a Disney movie, Grant thought about all the twists that had led to this moment. A broken down camper, a name on a housing form, a rainy night on the side of a road. Some people might have called it fate, but for Grant, it was something else. It was love, chosen, earned, and now forever. Grant Whitaker never planned to become a father, but when he followed his heart and stepped in to rescue 3 abandoned siblings, he found a purpose greater than wealth or success. Through love, persistence, and a promise kept, he didn't just save 3 lives, he built a family. Moved by this story? Share it with someone who believes in second chances and remind them that sometimes the smallest act of kindness can change everything.